but I'd like to first start by welcoming our attendees to today's webinar. We're going to be focused on the common issues that we've encountered in the preparation of SEND data sets. And we've got a really fantastic lineup of audience here comprised of sponsor toxicologists and study directors at CROs and a range of consultants and SEND providers, regulatory affairs professionals, and regulators as well from across the globe. My name is Rahul Madhavan, and I'm Vice President here at Point Cross here in our San Francisco Bay Area offices. And it's my pleasure to introduce Cassandra O'Malley, who's Technical Director of Non-Clinical Programs, who joins us from New Jersey. So Cassandra, if I could just ask that you go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to provide a little bit of background, even though we have a lot of folks on the call who have joined us, who have worked with us in the past. We're celebrating our 25th year of business this year, and we've been doing SEND for quite some time, far prior to the formal implementation of SEND as an exchange standard. We've standardized here at Point Cross thousands of studies, and we've formally supported the FDA's quality review program called Kickstart. So the purpose of today's webinar is really to share some of our findings on the most common issues that we see persist in SEND data sets that sponsors provide to us for their quality review prior to their submission. And these issues, broadly speaking, fall into several categories that range in severity and risk of technical rejection. And Cassandra is going to be outlining that further. But again, when we think about today's webinar, what I think is most important is that we take a step back and ask ourselves what the purpose is in having good quality SEND beyond just the validation related checks that oftentimes many people in industry will align with or think are sufficient enough. But good quality SEND is far more robust than that. We argue that as long as SEND and the SEND data set is indeed traceable and consistent to the study report as the GLP-like artifact, that it is very important for analysis texture and cross-study harmonization, repository, and indeed regulatory review. And so this webinar occurs at a time that more and more agencies are also considering adopting SEND as an exchange standard for their review of non-clinical data. And so to that point, we're going to be announcing our next webinar shortly, which is going to be focused on the visualization of SEND for individual, group, or cross-study analysis, and indeed serving those in industry who wish to do a visual QC spot check instead of a robust reconciliation between the SEND data set and the study report, which is going to be the focus of today's discussion. So in closing, our pursuit of perfection sees a perfect overlap in the Venn diagram between the contents of the study report and the electronic SEND data set that's being used for submission and analysis. And we believe that doing so meets the intent and the letter and the spirit of the FDA's technical conformance guidelines. And we believe that in doing so without a significant cost burden to the industry. And so we're proving that out with the launch of our SEND and our SEND QC quote generator, which is on the very front page of our website at pointcross.com. And we invite all of you to take a look at that as you're considering your SEND planning. So a quick housekeeping note, please do use the Q&A function down below at the very bottom of your Zoom toolbar. We're going to be collecting all those questions and providing written responses, which we'll post along with the recording of today's webinar on our website and our LinkedIn page. So I want to thank you all once again for taking the time to join us today. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Cassandra.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Rahul, and we'll just jump right into it. So what we're going to be covering today are some of the common problems with how SEND is being generated, the most prominent issues that we have found in the data sets that we have reviewed, and how we have resolved some of the issues by reconciling the SEND and the study report. And as Rahul mentioned, we are also going to be doing a next topic on visualization of all of these processes as well. So we have some background on information is coming from our SEND Assure process. It is an independent verification of the SEND datasets that are provided by third parties. We've taken a selection of 28 of the recent studies that we have standardized, and we have found that none of these studies were considered fit for submission because all of them would have had very, very severely impacted review analysis. We found that approximately 2% of the issues that were found needed correction in the study report, but about 98% of them were done in the send preparation itself. For each study, we found about 17 to 20 errors in each one that would have impacted the review. And over the course that we've been doing this send ashore process, that there has been no reduction in error over time. So any feedback that has been given has not been corrected over the course of time. About 8 to 10% of these studies, depending on the years that we've looked at them, have serious issues that we would consider them not submittable. There are a number of errors that would severely impact any sort of review through an agency for these. And if you look below, we've taken a selection of, on the left-hand side was these 28 studies. We found that there was approximately 21 send issues per study. And on the right-hand side, we selected actually 41 data sets performed by 2 different CROs. And there was a total from one CRO over the course of 30 studies, we found 482 errors over those 30 studies. Some of the common issues with send is how it starts with just being generated as opposed to the review process of all of this. Send is being generated according to the Send implementation guide. Send is not GLP, but relies on the study report as being the GLP or the GLP-like artifact. And Send does not at all times accommodate all of the information that was recorded in the study report. Proper Send representation is not just the data that is being captured in the LIMS system, but also compiles the metadata from the study report. The data captured throughout the study is only a portion of what is to be represented. There is information like exclusion points, specimen conditions, comments, nominal day labels that are used for grouping that all come from analysis of the recorded data points themselves and not from the recorded data. Send is typically generated by individuals that are not part of the study themselves, but they're experts in the Send standards. As this is usually passed around between CROs, sponsors, software, and services vendors, there can be errors that arise from different views on these standards. Premature conversion of control terminology loses the value of the original results. The collection systems do not collect all the information that is being studied. There are multiple test sites being used. For example, the LIM systems do not necessarily support the EG collection versus another one might support that, but doesn't collect the PK information. These can all be done at different test sites as well. When you combine these from the multiple systems, there can be discrepancies anywhere from the differences in subject identifiers, such as using alphanumeric versus just numeric, to completely different terminology that's being used for the same findings, and that's seen in the macroscopic and microscopic finding domains. Doing some analysis on the number of the metadata variables, it was found that despite the implementation guide referencing the study protocol for the most part, most of the required metadata is actually not available until the study report is completed. Referencing the protocol that is ingested at the start of the study will only include about half of the required variables for the Send preparer. Send can only be completed after the study is complete. The data has been analyzed and a study report, draft or final, is available. It is always preferential to have a final study report available, as that is going to be the completed study. To combat some of these issues, PointCross uses the study report to recreate all of the tables and figures available into a digital study report or a DSR. These tables and figures are used to compare against the collected data that was converted into Send, and through an automated and manual reconciliation process, any discrepancies between the study report and the Send dataset are then identified. Moving into really what everyone's here for, the common errors. The first thing I have to say is that the FDA currently has 3 rejection criteria that are implemented and will give you automatic rejection from the gateway before you even get to submit your Send dataset. These numbers are 1734, 1735, and 1736. I'm going to be focusing on the first and last. 1734 is in reference to the ts.xbt. 1735 references the study tagging file, and 1736 references the availability of the dm.xbt and the define.xml files. 1734 has multiple reasons that this could be flagged. Number one is that the ts.xbt is actually missing. The solution to that would be providing the ts.xbt. You need at least a simplified ts.xbt, and depending on the date, the full ts.xbt would be preferable. The second reason that you could trigger this error is that the study ID is mismatching between the data set or the submission and the ts.xbt. The way to fix this would be confirming that your study ID matches between the data set and the ts.xbt. And there are some additional parameters that you can include in the ts.xbt, such as alternative study identifiers that may solve this, as well as the study tagging identifiers in the define.xml. The third reason that this might be rejected for this is that the study start date is missing. A full ts.xbt file requires a study start date. Even if this is unknown, there should be a record present with the null flavor value of NA, standing for that the study did not have a protocol start date that was signed. 1736 references the missing define.xml or dm.xbt. The two reasons for that would simply be one of either of the files is missing. And for each study to be submitted and pass through the gateway for these, a define.xml and a dm.xbt with the matching ts.xbt from 1734 and the matching study IDs must be submitted. So in summary of those, for submission to module 4 to be accepted into the gateway, each study needs the ts.xbt, dm.xbt, and define.xml. After that, technically, your send dataset can be reviewed, even if you have those 3 files. Each file does have their own record and study tagging requirements to be evaluated, but those are going to be in the more explicit conformance rules. So moving into the errors that are found in conformance, these errors were identified by Point Cross's eData validator, which is checking against FDA validator rules, CDISC send conformance rules, CDISC define conformance rules, FDA technical rejection criteria, and more. There are additional checks that are built in looking for conformance as well as traceability within the study. One of the biggest errors that we find is in trial design modeling. Trial design models are incorrect if they do not match the trial design that is represented in the study report. And this can be incorrect in numerous ways. There could be the number of elements, arms, or sets do not align with the study report. You could have a study with a recovery element that is not represented properly. You could have excessive or no TK groups in the TX domain that were represented as different groups in the study report. It's possible that males and females have separate dosing. Maybe the females have 1/3 of the dose that the males do, and those would have to be allocated differently. There could be incorrect durations in the elements. If you have a 4-day dosing period and a 28-day, those should have different elements. And there could also be no differentiation in the arms and sets, such as the sets need to be differentiated by the dose or specifically a TK group or not. A proper trial design is the basis for analyzing a study beyond just the recorded values. Without it, you would be comparing all these different groups with no information as to how they are different. You could be comparing dosed values versus non-dosed values, different dose levels against each other, and you could be comparing the last dose levels after different repetitions of dosing. You could be comparing a day 4 versus a day 28 value if these are not designed appropriately. Another common thing that we find, and this is going to be triggered by any sort of validation system that you're using, is that you would have missing or multiple parameters. Depending on the study, you can have multiple or duplicate records that are either picked up because they are not identified appropriately in defined XML, or you could be missing some of these, which are being marked as required. And validation systems programmatically are going to flag these as duplicate records without looking at the value, or they are going to qualify these as missing without being able to scientifically evaluate that. So for each value that appears as a duplicate, for the record, we do this manual intervention and we evaluate, is it necessary to have these records? Do they add value? Is the information already present elsewhere? If you have two treatment vehicles in the TS.xbt, are they actually different, or are they the same treatment vehicle that is written two different ways? Can it be described using the define file or the NSDRG? In that specific case, I would describe that in the NSDRG. That is just a spelling difference that is present throughout the report. It's not necessarily a scientific difference. Usually the duplications can be described using the NSDRG to, quote, explain them away. When there is a parameter that is missing, though, the best option would be to appropriately populate the variable. If that cannot be done, that should be described in the NSDRG as well, such as if there were no baseline values recorded, obviously you cannot populate the baseline flag. Another really common one is that there are observations occurring after removal. The absolute date and time of removal is present in the ds.xbt, and many times it's only the date of removal in the dm.xbt. Any observations that occur after the exact time or date of removal will produce an error. This is not always a true error. This is just a programmatic way of representing this. In the organ measurement domain, it is very explicitly stated that the records are to appear with the date and time of the organ measurement, not at the date of sacrifice. But for the other postmortem examinations, such as the microscopic examination, these should be the date and time of the disposition of the subject. For other records in the dataset, such as food and water consumption, all of these dates and times should end at or before the time of removal. You should never have a record present for food consumption after the subject has been removed from the study. One of the biggest things that we find is some traceability errors. These may not directly impact your submission to the FDA or your other agency that you're submitting to, but these are going to be found to impact the analysis if you are using them. Errors are found during reconciliation, the process that I described earlier, with visual and tabular representations. It's between the dataset and the digital study report, and this is done using the XBiome technology. The biggest thing that I can emphasize is that the NSDRG and the define files are the place that should be used to describe anything that might be triggering an error or warning in the validation system, or to further explain how the dataset was populated. Send is approximately covers 90% of the things that could happen in a toxicology study. There are always going to be things that happen that are not directly covered in the implementation guide, technical rejection criteria, or anything like that. There are always these cases. The NSDRG is the supplemental document specifically provided with the purpose to aid in the reviewer's review. When in doubt, put in an NSDRG note. If you have any questions, if it does not immediately fit, if you are getting errors or warnings, use the NSDRG. We commonly find missing domains. The biggest domain that we find is missing is the DD domain, the death diagnosis records. It's very commonly misunderstood because no one wants to have an unplanned sacrifice or unplanned death throughout a study. When the subject's death is premature and a cause of death can be found, a DD domain should be presented in the study, in your data set. We also find that subfiles are often missing. For the sub-PC, it would be because there's a missing ppcalc-n, which is the value used for interpretation when results are either below a level of quantitation or above a level of quantitation. We also find that sup-MA, sup-MI, and even sup-CL are commonly missing. Sup-CL doesn't necessarily have to be included, but sup-MA is usually included in a study. This occurs when there are missing modifiers that were interpreted as part of the original finding, as opposed to being modifiers of the finding. This is where the premature CT normalization comes into play. If you're doing your CT too early before you're evaluating for the original results and standardized results, you're going to be including a lot of those modifiers into the base result and not getting the appropriate modifiers out. We also find that pool def is missing many times. When food consumption is recorded as a pooled group, The pooled group should be represented instead of a standardized individual result. So if you have a cage of 4 subjects, the cage of 4 subjects should be represented in food consumption as opposed to being individual records where each individual record is the same for each one of those 4 subjects. And then one of the biggest, newest issues coming out of here is that out of scope domains are not present, whereas some domains are not yet totally standardized. They may be coming out in the SendIG 4.0. They're not part of Send, but information that is collected and part of the study necessary for evaluation should be presented in a Send or tabular manner. This is per the SendIG 3.1.1, the TCG. If you have information such as ADA that is necessary to include and is necessary for evaluation, these should be included in the appropriate domains as per the white papers, the technical conformance guide, the SendIG implementation, etc. Something that I hear a lot of people talk about are also the missing exclusion or baseline flags. Baseline flags are expected in most domains. They are populated typically based on the last observation before dosing. If they are not included, this is something that you can explain away. But if you can identify that a baseline observation occurred, such as a body weight day done on day -1 or laboratory testing done on day -1, these should be identified and flagged. Exclusion flags, however, are permissible and are populated based on the analysis after the data is recorded. So exclusion flags are done typically after the study is complete. These could be for any reason, such as a subject was dosed with the wrong dose and they chose to exclude that point. They were out of range for a body weight. They missed a dose, had an extra dose. There are many reasons that something could be excluded. It could even be for a technology error. The biggest thing that we need to emphasize is that the proper reason for exclusion would be why it was not done or why it is to be excluded. A reason of excluded does not provide any information that is appropriate for analysis. This is very common to see that E equals exclusion, but we need to know the exact reason as to why it was excluded. This would come down the line when you're looking at multiple studies and evaluating if there is something with the test article, maybe the supplier of your subjects. Why are we looking at all of these records being excluded? There's a very hot topic going around as to whether or not to include nominal days and nominal labels. We commonly see that nominal days and nominal labels are not populated because it is believed that everything can come off of the study day or the study date. This is not true in many studies. Not all studies go to plan, and we can always take a look at the nominal day and the nominal label to figure out how to group together some of these observations. A protocol could dictate that in week 4, after there was a single dose on day 1, that all subjects are to receive a set of laboratory tests. Let's say subjects 1, 6, and 15 all receive that dose on day 1, but because of how things are being set up in the lab, they've received their laboratory tests on day 25 and 26. If they receive them on day 25 and 26 using the study day, you would not be able to group these together. But per the protocol, these were all done in week 4. It's a single observation in week 4 for each subject, and they would all be grouped together using the nominal day or nominal label for that week 4 time point. And then what is, I think, the biggest issue is incorrect or missing controlled terminology. Controlled terminology exists to make analysis easier. Without it, there is no consistent way to record and analyze the data that is being collected. Everyone has different limb systems, different veterinarians, different technologists who are using their own language to describe the findings that they see. Without controlled terminology, when the code list is not followed, none of this information can be accurately compared against each other. The purpose of controlled terminology is to reduce ambiguity. When we use controlled terminology, we can compare against the historical control. We can determine what the control is in regards to the white blood cells in rabbits on day 28 after dosing. We can take a look at what is the body weight of a 4-year-old cyno. But we need to use the same terminology again and again and again to see this. When the controlled terminology is incorrect, either via an auto mapping or human error, the potential exists for an incorrect conclusion to be drawn about the investigated treatment. Obviously, this is something that we do not want in industry. We want everyone's study to be accepted and to be evaluated fairly, and we look to remove all errors in that regard. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for attending today, and I hope to read all of your questions about what we've seen, and you will be receiving an update via email for that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cassandra, and thank you to all of our audience members. What we'll do is we'll stick around for another couple of minutes to allow any more questions that you have to come in up until the half-hour mark, but please do use the Q&A function down below, and we'll make sure to have all written responses provided in writing and published on our website and our LinkedIn page for all of you. And we'll also share the recording of this. So we'll stick around here, but I want to thank every one of you for having taken the time to join us this morning.